resume like they are hardworking or they're a team player, things like that. Or of course they put their technical skills or, you know, things they studied in school. But it's an interesting question because I think resiliency really could be marketable. It is a skill that is useful. And although I don't think I would just list I'm resilient on my resume, you can talk about assuming that you've developed this skill. Because of course you don't want to put something on your resume that you can't actually demonstrate. But
I can lie on my
resume. If you can develop the skill of resiliency.
No. I can
well,
lie
yeah,
on my
I mean,
resume,
I can lie on my resume and say that I speak Russian, but as soon as somebody tries to speak Russian to me, they're going to realize that I lied. So like, you can put it on there, but people will eventually figure out, hey, you don't really have that skill. So it's not a good idea to put things on there you can't actually do, because it's sooner or later someone's going to want you to demonstrate that skill, and then you're going to be in trouble. Yeah, so don't lie about it. Just do the work to develop that skill. I mean, if you think resiliency is important, and I do, then whoa, sorry, my computer fell over. If you think it's important, develop the skills related to resiliency, and that's what we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about what skills are related to being resilient, to being able to grow from challenge, to be able to adapt to difficult situations and draw on your strengths and come through that difficult situation. So yeah, I mean, I think it's definitely an interesting thing to put on a resume or to talk in an interview about, hey, you know, I've made it through some difficult times and I'm a strong person and I can adapt and be flexible and I can grow from challenge.
So in this case, I'm putting COVID-19 on my resume as a sign of being, you know, resilient and strong. Yes.
And you didn't just make it through, you thrived. I mean, you put together this 3-session talk on resiliency and positive thinking and self-care.
Indeed. So let's talk about how do we develop this skill? Yeah. What do we do?
Yes. So how do we become more resilient? One of the most important things, which is really what we talked about last time. So for some of the people who were here last session, we talked about self-care. And even the session before that, we talked about adjusting to this new way of being in the world right now. And both of those things require some self-awareness. So one of the key things of being resilient is being able to notice your own responses, notice your thoughts, your feelings, your behaviors, and recognize, okay, how am I responding to this situation? What am I doing? And is that helpful or is that not helpful? Right? So we have to continue to work on self-awareness and being able to sort of pause when we're in a difficult situation and think, how am I responding to this? And am I making things better or am I making things worse with my response? So again, that's a skill that you can develop, and it takes practice. And some of us come by it more easily than others, but it's about practicing mindfulness. It's about practicing self-awareness and just being able to stop and say to yourself, what am I doing right now? And is it helping or not? So that's one of them. And we did talk about that last session. Another step beyond that is when you do recognize that, hey, I'm responding in a way that's making this more difficult, then can you change? Can you adapt? Can you alter your way of thinking, which we're going to talk about today, or your way of behaving, or can you do something to change your emotions? Like we talked about that in the first session about stress and doing things like exercise or meditation, yoga, whatever it is for you. We talked about a whole bunch of them. And then after last session, I shared links, which Gahar mentioned, they were shared on the Telegram channel, some links to some various relaxation of self-care exercises. So are you aware of your responses and what you're doing and if they help or not? And then can you change somehow when you're not responding in a helpful way to try something different and more flexible? So part of resiliency is adaptability and flexibility in your own thinking patterns is part of that. So what we really want to focus on today is that positive thinking, that optimism component of resiliency, because part of being resilient is continuing to have hope for the future and being able to think that, hey, this is not the Titanic. we are not going to crash into an iceberg and sink. So like, can we maintain our ability to see the good in things and have hope for the future, even when we're going through a difficult and uncertain situation? That is part of resiliency.
So that was comprehensible. Is this high time for us to talk about optimism?
Yeah, I think it is. So
you might not like this question. You might not like this question. I just know it, but still I'm going to ask. Okay. I'm familiar with the, let's say, negative connotation of being optimist, as if, oh, he is or she is an optimist, saying like she's hopeless, and in a way that she buries her head into sand, or she's reluctant to admit the reality, or as someone who wears rose-colored glasses. So this is one thing. And another thing, I've been into many, sophisticated conversations when people said, I'm not this, I'm neither that or nor this, I'm a realist. And I'm like, yeah, okay. So do we really have this, let's say, people who can be considered as optimists, who are pessimists and realists? Or is this true that optimism is just a trait that that tells that someone is reluctant to accept the reality? So these are two questions.
Yeah, those are interesting questions. There are no questions that I dislike. Let me start by saying that. I'm always very open to questions. So there's two things in there, right? One, you asked about, is optimism just a way to deny difficulties or pretend that bad things don't exist? And that's definitely not true. Optimism is about seeing things, recognizing that there are difficulties, that there are challenges, right? Optimists don't deny that, like, this is a difficult time right now, right? But optimists will see bad things as more of a challenge to be overcome or an opportunity rather than a threat to be avoided, right? So if you're an optimist, you approach that problem with a different mindset than a pessimist does. So a pessimist will recognize that there's a problem and tend to see it as a threat to them. They feel threatened by it. And so that leads to feelings of anxiety and strategies that involve avoiding the problem because it causes them anxiety. So we don't want to think about it. We don't want to do anything about it. And so it can cause more of a withdrawal. So optimists tend to go towards a problem and try and solve it. Pessimists tend to move away from the problem and try to avoid it. So they both recognize that there's a challenge. It's their perception of the challenge impacts how they respond to that challenge. Right? So optimism doesn't mean that you ignore that bad things are happening. And it doesn't mean that you stick your head in the sand and pretend everything's okay. That's not what it's about. It's about a different understanding of how to approach the difficult situation that you're in. Does that distinction make sense?
For me, it does.
Okay, good. What was the other part of the question, though? You had
other part of it,
and now I've lost the thread of the second one.
Do we really have this, people who can be realists?
Was it about being traits?
Neither here nor there, they are realists, So is it a trait, first of all, optimism?
Yeah. Okay. So personality traits are things that are stable about you that don't really change much. So if you're an extrovert or you're an introvert, those things don't really change much. That's kind of who you are. Optimism is more of a skill than a trait. So optimism is a skill that you can learn. It's something you can develop. And it's not like you're born an optimist or a pessimist and that's it. It's sort of like who you are for the rest of your life. And also, interestingly, both personality traits and optimism, they're not an either or category. It's not like you're all extrovert or all introvert. Same thing. You don't have to be all optimism or all pessimism. It's a scale. I wish I had a whiteboard. I don't have a whiteboard. But imagine it like a number line, right? and you can have optimism on one end and pessimism on the other end, and you can actually fall anywhere in between, right? So people can be like in the middle. You're not totally an optimist or totally a pessimist. So like, for example, if you took that optimism test that was shared before the session, you'll notice you got scores in a couple of different areas. One was explanatory style, which we can talk about in a few minutes. And it's not all or nothing. It's not like either you have a positive explanatory style or you have a negative explanatory style. You got a number for those, and those numbers varied, right? So you can be an optimist to some degree, and in other situations, a pessimist to some degree, if you're kind of in that middle right now. And it's, again, something that you can develop. So you might push yourself more towards the optimism side, so that more often you fall towards optimism than pessimism.
So, are there any participants? Yes, sure.
Okay.
I was just looking at my scores because I took this test, and it turns out I'm thinking is quite pessimistic, they say. Okay. So this is the reason why I came up with this, Titanic example. Sorry.
Okay.
So what about others? Are there any participants who took this test and you want to share, or no? Okay.
Maybe later. Yeah, but I will write there as well. But you guys are welcome, yes, to write and share.
You are welcome to take this test, and you can find it in our channel. So, Laurie, what do I do if I'm for example, if I'm an optimist, but I'm surrounded with pessimist people?
Oh, yeah.
What do I do? Is it possible to stay optimistic in a pessimistic surrounding?
It is, but it's more difficult, right? It's more of a challenge because attitudes are contagious. So if you are trying to maintain an optimistic outlook, but you are surrounded by people who tend towards pessimism, that's harder for you. So just recognize, I think, that that's going to be more of a challenge if you're dealing with a lot of pessimism around you. Now, what can you do? Well, one is, of course, you can always control your own attitude. So just because other people are pessimists doesn't mean you have to let them drag you down into their style of negative thinking. You can try and just, remind yourself that optimism is better for you, and that you're working on that, and sort of continue to practice it despite the pessimism around you. But also you can try and invite the people around you, those pessimists around you, into your practice of optimism, because it is a skill that can be learned and it has a lot of benefits. So one of the things that I would try before I give up on my family and friends as just unrelenting pessimists that I can do nothing about, I would invite them to try to practice optimism with me, because there's a lot of benefits. Optimists handle stress better. Optimists have a better immune system. And right now, when we're talking about trying to stay healthy and not get sick, having a boosted immune system is a really good thing. And if you can do it just by changing your way of thinking, I mean, why not? You don't need to spend money on a bunch of vitamins or other things to boost your immune system. You can just change your way of thinking. So optimists live longer. They have better health outcomes in a variety of areas. So because they have a boosted immune system, they heal faster from a bunch of different illnesses. They tend not to get sick as often. And interestingly, they have better relationships and more social support, because really, if you think about it, optimists are more fun to be around. Right? It's more uplifting. It's more enjoyable to be around somebody who is positive in their thinking. If you're a pessimist and all you do is see the bad and complain about everything that's wrong with the world around you, how much do people want to be around that? Like, people are going to be drawn more into optimism. So if you can be more of an optimistic thinker, people are going to appreciate that and they're going to want to be around you. So optimists have better social support networks, and they have better relationship satisfaction. The people around them say they're happier with their relationships. Right? So, and the other thing I didn't mention is they're more successful. So optimists tend to do better in high stress careers, they make more money in sales if they're in sales. As students, optimists have higher GPAs. They're more likely to graduate from university. They tend to be better athletes. They're more likely to be an Olympian. Optimists are. They're more likely to be elected president or prime minister if they have more optimistic content in their campaign language. So there's all sorts of tangible benefits to being an optimist. So invite your pessimists around you into your optimism and see if you can kind of win them over to your side. Even if, like Shahina, you said, you're kind of a pessimist right now and you feel like you're on the Titanic. Even if that's true of you, that all the more reason for you to invite the other pessimists around you. It's like, hey, you know what? I'm going to be trying this and it's not going to be easy. I'm going to keep doing it because I recognize there's a lot of benefits to it. Why don't you do it with me? It's kind of like an exercise club, right? When you've got friends to do that push-up challenge with you, it motivates you to do your push-ups every day. This can be the same.
Definitely.
I did push-ups yesterday and thought of you, by the way.
So we should stay. Oh, really? Did you use the song?
In my head, I didn't have it. I didn't have it playing. I sang it to myself.
That's great. So now I'm thinking we should state clearly that optimism is not a trait. It's not something that person is born with, but this is something you cultivate over time. And this is your way of thinking. This is your, let's say, lifestyle, the way you treat challenges on your path. So this is just to, make this statement for all clear. So another thing is that for me, in order to stay, for a quick-tempered person, in order to stay positive, they should definitely control their quick responses. And again, it goes back to that self-regulation point when we told about how we should deal with our emotions. What do we do? What do you suggest to do to our quick-tempered audience, listeners?
Yeah, so it's a challenge if you tend to have quick responses, and now those responses tend to border more on becoming upset or angry. You have to be aware of when you're responding in a way that's unhelpful. So you have to be able to notice it. That's the first thing, is being able to stop yourself and say, okay, you know what? I'm getting a little upset right now. I don't think that this is helpful. And what I do is I literally stop everything and I breathe. And we don't need to do the breathing now, but those of you who did the other 2 sessions, we did this mindful breathing exercise. So being able to just stop and take a few deep breaths, and that will slow everything down for you so that you can think a little bit for a moment about, wait, why am I upset? And it might take some time to figure out, why are you upset? So sometimes you have to be okay just moving away from that situation, saying, you know what? I need some time to sort this out. I recognize that I'm getting upset. Can we come back to this situation later? Assuming that there's another person involved. If it's just you and you're getting mad, like yesterday, my son was trying to do some online homework and the technology wasn't working. And he came into me and he said, Mom, I'm really mad. I wanted to put my fist through the computer, so I'm going to just walk away. I'm going to stop doing this right now. I'm like, okay, you know what? That's good. I'm glad you recognize that you need to take a break. Do something else. You can come back to this. So that's a skill. Recognizing that you're getting upset and being able to pause everything and say, okay, you know what? This is unhelpful. My responses right now are making the situation worse. That's part of resiliency. Right? So you just have to cultivate that ability to recognize when you're getting upset and then push the pause button and do something to help yourself. Might just be taking a few deep breaths and then coming back to the situation, but it might be walking away, trying something more involved to calm yourself.
Yeah, it actually makes more sense, because part of our negative energy is increased by the fact that we try to find someone to blame at this situation. I mean, for us, it's like vital. It's important to find someone, that guilty party, and say, it's because of you. So instead of doing that, probably we should be thinking what would be our next actions, or just to calm ourselves, drink some, I don't know, cold water, some tea. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's interesting you bring that up because I haven't quite gotten to it yet, but thinking about the specific strategies that you can use to cultivate optimism, things that you can do to really change your negative thinking. One of the things that people often engage in, I call it the blame game because it rhymes in English. I think that sounds nice. But in some of the literature, they talk about using them language. They fall into a them trap. When you're experiencing a challenge, right? When you're facing a difficult situation, one negative thinking strategy that we can sometimes fall into, and they're called thinking traps. There's 5 of them, and I can go over them briefly, but one of them is the blame game. So instead of trying to identify what the problem is and seek proactive, positive solutions to the problem, you just start blaming everyone for whatever it is you perceive as wrong, right? So instead of being constructive, all that does is sort of lead to feelings of anger and hostility because you're like, it's the environment's fault, it's my family's fault, it's my boss's fault, it's everyone else but you. And I'm not saying it's your fault either, but engaging in that blaming of other people is never constructive, right? It does not lead to positive feelings, and it gets in the way of being optimistic and being resilient. So you want to try and recognize when you're falling into that trap of playing the blame game, because it's not going to help. So if you can notice that that's your tendency, that you tend to look outside of yourself and blame all kinds of people around you or the environment or whatever it is, and stop yourself. Again, it's about recognizing when you're falling into these negative thinking patterns and then stopping yourself from doing that, breaking that cycle of negative thinking. Then you can reframe it in a more positive light, right? So that's one of them. The other side of that same coin, which I know you didn't ask about, but they go together. Some people fall into this blame game and blame everyone else. The other side of that coin is people fall into this me trap where they take it all on themselves and say, everything's my fault. Anytime that there's a challenge, a difficult situation, they constantly beat themselves up about it and say, what did I do? How did I contribute to this? And it's always like that leads to feelings of guilt, feelings of sadness and depression. And again, that's not constructive. Guilt is a complete waste of time. It never leads to anything good. So you need to look out for both of those traps. It's always something in the middle, right? I mean, it's always probably we're bringing something to the situation. Other people are bringing something to the situation. It's partly the environment, the situation we're in right now with the virus. So trying to lay blame places, it's completely unhelpful. It's a waste of your energy. So try to avoid both of those thinking traps and just focus on and this is one of the things we didn't talk about yet, but there are some specific things that optimists do differently than pessimists. And one thing that optimists are really good at, that pessimists are not good at, is understanding what they can control in a difficult situation and focusing on that and letting go of all the things they can't control, right? So optimists are good at recognizing, right now, I can't control when the government's going to reopen, allow us to go out again. I can't control how long this is going to last. I can't control if I maybe can work from home, can't work from home. Like there's a lot of variables right now that it's just not under your control. Optimists are good at recognizing and letting that go, right? So letting go of the fact that I can't control this quarantine. I have no power over it. So I'm not going to waste my energy complaining about it, thinking about it, worrying about it. I'm going to let that go. I'm going to focus on what I can control. You know, I can control how I take care of myself and my family. I can control my perceptions of the situation and the way I think about the scenario that's going on, right? So they put their effort into things that they feel they can control and will help make the situation better. And they let go of all that other stuff.
And eventually feel themselves happy.
Oh, sorry.
Oh, yeah. Go ahead. I'm just
no.
Yeah.
It's just that as we were talking about optimism and positivism, there was a question from a girl, Gulnaz. She said, is there any difference between optimism and the positivism?
Optimism is more of the technical term, right? So in the research on this, it's always called optimism. We can call it positive thinking. Positivism isn't quite a proper word in English. We don't use that phrase. So we for our purposes can have positive thinking and optimism be interchangeable. We're talking about the same thing, but optimism is kind of the more technical term for it.
Then I guess the next question could be also, like, as they are linked with each other, why positive people are more successful than optimistic people? I don't know.
Well, they're not, right? Because optimistic people are, it's the same thing as positive thinking.
Yeah.
So, but I mean, it's an interesting question. Why are optimists or positive thinkers more successful than pessimists? Right? That's the more
wait, how
valuable
did you
question
know
to
that?
ask. How do we know that they're more successful?
No. Can we ask Gulnaz to explain it a little? How does she know that this is a positive person, not an optimist? Like, I really want to see the difference. How she
Identifies
what she thinks is different about those terms.
Yes.
Gulnaz, can you step in as well and regarding your
Gulnaz,
question?
it's showtime. Where are you?
Gulnaz. Huh.
I think she's muted.
Let's have a look. Let me find. Okay, here she is. Gulnaz, I unmuted you, so I don't know. Maybe if you could, I don't know. Maybe she's.
Oh, I see. She typed in the chat that she doesn't know the difference. That's why she was asking. It's a really good question.
Oh,
I think in English those terms really are interchangeable.
There is also some people writing privately, like, if person is optimistic, how can I be a positive person? I have one question also all about attitude coming from optimism. One question from Norbek. Why positive people are more successful? That was the same question from the same person. Yes.
Yes. Okay. So let's go back to why are positive people or optimistic people more successful? I'll address that. And then we can talk specifically about how do I become, like, what strategies can I use to become more optimistic? We can talk about that too, but some things about optimists that I think lead them to be more successful. Has to sort of the practices of optimists, what they do that's different from pessimists. And when optimists are faced with a challenge, when they're faced with what we call a problem, right? When you're in a difficult situation, an optimist tends to see that as an opportunity for growth. I said that before, rather than a threat to be avoided. And so they move towards it instead of move away from it. So again, that's going to lead to more success because you're addressing the problem proactively, head on, instead of pretending it doesn't really. I mean, it's not like you're pretending it doesn't exist, but you're saying, yes, this is bad and I can't do anything about it. Right? So optimism is more empowering than pessimism. And that's going to lead to more success because pessimism leads more to giving up, right? Because you feel like you can't really do anything about it. The world just sucks. Everything's terrible. And there's nothing I can do about it. Why should I try? So that's part of it. Another part of optimism is explanatory style. And this is what that optimism test that was linked ahead of time looked at. Explanatory style is, how do you explain when bad things happen, when difficult situations present themselves to you? And there's 3 things that optimists do differently. When optimists see a bad thing happening, they tend to see it as not their own fault. So they avoid blaming themselves for it, right? Which is empowering. They also see it as changeable. It's not permanent. A pessimist, when something bad happens to them, they tend to see that as permanent. Like, it's bad now and it's always going to be bad. It's that I'm on the Titanic kind of idea, right? So optimists tend to see the situation as something that's changeable, and they see it as something that's specific to this scenario and not global. So what that means is pessimists, when something bad happens, they tend to over exaggerate it and say, well, this one bad thing happened and then everything else is going to be bad too. And life is just going to be terrible. And there's never, ever going to be anything good again. Right? They sort of blow it up into a bigger thing than it is. And all of those tendencies of pessimists, then again, they lead to less success when you're faced with a challenge, right? Because you feel like There's nothing you can do about it. Everything's bad and it's always going to be bad, right? So why should I try? Whereas optimists recognize there are things they control, things that they can control, and that this problem is specific and it's changeable, and that's going to lead them to taking actions to make their situation better. So they're going to work harder, they're going to be more hopeful about the future, which is going to motivate them. And so they're going to see more success when they're challenged in things like athletics, school, work. They see it as a problem, as a challenge they can overcome, rather than a problem that they just need to accept and sort of be like, okay, there's nothing I can do about it. Does that make sense? Why optimists would have more success in life in general than pessimists?
It was Nurbek's question. So Nurbakat's question. So hopefully it does make sense. But
Okay.
someone also wrote that sometimes climate also affects to the mood of a person.
It does. It's true. I live in Minnesota and it snowed last week.
Oh.
We had, well, about 4 or 5 inches, which I don't know how many centimeters that is, enough to measure. It was like this much snow on the ground. I was not an optimist that day. I was really mad at the world. I'm like, are you kidding me? We're stuck in our houses and it's snowing in April. Like, you know, so sometimes the weather can affect our mood, but understanding that that's temporary, right? The weather is always changing. And so it's not like you have to be on your A game, totally optimistic every day. It's just, you continue to try to see the good in things. And you're gonna have bad days.
Yeah. And exactly about that, someone wrote, is it natural for a person to be an optimist or pessimist all the time? That it depends on a person's character as well. I think was a similar, a little bit above someone else's questions about natural, like whether it is natural to be all the time optimist.
You know, most of us are somewhere in between. I mean, we definitely have natural tendencies, and you can probably think of people you know who just sort of easily come by optimism. My mother is like that. She just always sees the good in every situation. It just comes very naturally to her. And other people, like my husband, is very much a pessimist, and it sort of naturally comes to him to see all of the negatives. And so, you know, if you're naturally a pessimist, it's going to take more effort on your part to train yourself to think more optimistically. And even an optimist in some situations can struggle to still maintain that optimistic thinking. So it's natural to have variability among people, and it's natural to have variability within the same person from moment to moment, from situation to situation. It's all about continuing to develop that skill and recognizing, you know, optimism is usually going to lead to better outcomes for me. So I'm going to keep pushing myself to practice those skills related to optimism.
Yeah, it makes sense.
Are there other questions in the chat?
Not so far. This is the one,
okay.
all the ones that we covered, I think.
Then maybe we can sort of circle back to, what do I do if I'm not an optimist, or how do I break that cycle of negative thinking? Like, what are some things that I could actually do to try and push myself more towards optimism? And one of the things is, again, to recognize when you're falling into one of those thinking traps, like blaming others or blaming yourself, to notice that those are typical patterns that we tend to fall into, and stop yourself. Like literally stop yourself and say, okay, I'm doing it again. Just call yourself out on it. And there's a couple others. I'll just mention them because people have different tendencies. Maybe you're not into this blaming yourself or others thing, but you fall into this other trap called mind reading, where you just assume what other people are thinking, right? You don't bother to ask, you just assume what people are thinking. And you say, oh, you know what, my family is probably so upset with me about this, or, you know, they're feeling this way or that way about the quarantine, whatever it is. We just make assumptions about how people are feeling instead of actually having conversations about it. And that can lead to a lot of miscommunications, misunderstandings, disagreements between people. So it's unhelpful for relationships to do that. So if you notice that you're doing that, if you're just assuming what other people are thinking or feeling, try and stop yourself and say, you know, maybe I should ask. Like, let's have a conversation about this. Especially right now, I'm doing a lot of that personally, just asking people around me and my family who's with me and reaching out to friends and saying, how are you doing with all this? Tell me what's going on with you. Instead of assuming they're okay or assuming they're not okay, I'm going to ask and give them an opportunity to just communicate. And that strengthens relationships. So we already talked about blaming yourself, blaming others. The next one is catastrophizing, which I just like as an English word. It's a fun word to try and say, catastrophizing, turning things into a catastrophe or making problems bigger than they actually are. Some people kind of fall into this trap of spiraling down into the worst case scenario. What if this quarantine lasts forever? What if I never get to be able to work again and I have no money and we lose our house and we're homeless and right? And they just spiral out of control and turn it into a much bigger problem than it actually is in this moment. And again, that's unhelpful. So when you engage in catastrophizing, you make the problem worse. You overestimate the problem while also underestimating your own ability to cope. So you don't give yourself enough credit for being able to cope. And humans are amazingly strong and adaptive. We can get through a lot of bad things and come out the other side of it resilient, stronger, having grown in some way as a person. Give yourself credit for that. And then the last one is falling into feelings of helplessness or hopelessness, just kind of giving up and saying there's nothing I can do about it. Right? Yes, there's always something you can do, if only taking care of yourself and addressing your own mental health. Right? You can always control your own perceptions of things. Right? So noticing when you're falling into any of those negative thinking cycles and stopping yourself. It's a technique that's called thought stopping. It's not very creative at all. Literally thought stopping. Noticing when you're having any of these negative thoughts, stopping yourself, and then saying, okay, I need to do something different. I notice that I'm falling into one of these patterns of negative thinking. I'm being a pessimist. I'm going to stop. I'm going to reframe. I'm going to reframe the situation in a more positive light. So force yourself, literally force yourself to make a positive statement, right? So for example, my friend is waiting for a package to arrive from me and it keeps getting delayed. And I was getting upset saying, why is this delayed? Why is this package not there yet? This is very frustrating. It was supposed to be there. And he said, it's fine, because now I have another week to look forward to it. I'm excited. I'm anticipating it. It's something to look forward to. Once it arrives, he'll be happy it's there, but he won't have that anticipation, that thing to look forward to anymore. I'm like, good job. You're absolutely looking at this in the right way, right? So he stopped me from being negative and reframed it in a positive light. And we can do that for each other, especially if you have people around you that you've sort of recruited into your optimism training that you're going to be doing. But we can also do it for ourselves. We could stop and literally make ourselves rethink it from a positive light. And sometimes that can be really hard and feel really awkward, but that's part of retraining your brain, teaching your brain how to see the positive side of things. It takes time. And eventually, if you continue to force yourself to practice it, it will come more naturally and it won't feel so awkward or effortful to do.
And speaking of reframing, I forgot to tell that, as it seems to me that we overuse and label every single thing on our way as a problem. And we have this problem with the word problem, really. Literally, we, by labeling certain things, we create problems out of nothing. So probably maybe we can limit ourselves and stop before calling something a problem. Do you see this as a problem? Because
no, I see it as a challenge, Shakina.
Oh, okay. So let's reframe it. And call it a challenge or a puzzle.
Exactly. Yes, I think that's a really good point, because we do create more difficulty for our own selves with our perception of situations. So when we label something as a problem, it may seem more daunting, more overwhelming to address it than if we look at it, again, as an optimist would look at this difficult situation, not so much as a problem to be avoided, but an opportunity, a challenge to overcome. So I've been trying throughout this whole session not to use the word problem, but to use the word challenge, because a challenge is more empowering. At least I feel that way about the language. Right? I feel like a problem sounds harder to solve than a challenge. Yeah, I'm up for a challenge, right? I'd like to challenge myself. I mean, yeah, yeah. Well, personally, I think of adventures as much more fun and exciting. But yes, if that works for you, you can call it an adventure. Right? This getting through quarantine is an adventure. Mm-hmm. It's definitely something new for a lot of us, and it will bring out new things in ourselves, new things in our environment and the people around us. There is something of an adventure to that. Certainly it's a challenge, but it doesn't have to be seen as a problem. It's an opportunity.
Adventure of getting to know yourself, I guess.
It is, getting to know yourself, getting to know your relationships better.
Yeah.
Right. There's some adventure to that, spending 24 hours a day, 7 days a week with the same people and figuring out how to navigate that. It's also an adventure to see, how am I going to manage this on my own if you're quarantining by yourself, right? What will it be like to be physically isolated, not necessarily socially isolated, because thankfully we have technology and we can still stay connected to people, but it's definitely a challenge. And we can learn new things from that challenge. That's part of resiliency, right? Learning and growing from the challenge.
There is one also question in the chat. Someone writes, just so curious, is there any benefit to be a pessimist as well? It reminds me of this animation. It's called Inside Out. In Russian, it was translated differently. So if you remember in this animation, the happiness and the sad emotion, basically they stuck together. And in the end of the movie, we realize that actually it's okay sometimes to be pessimistic and have these sad emotions as well. We understood that these emotions is necessary as well to get through. We can't be all the time happy and jumping, So maybe it somehow relates to this question that this guy, someone posted here.
So, Laurie, do you think it's useful?
I don't know.
Being a pessimist?
Yeah. So I guess maybe the question is somehow linked whether it's okay to have a pessimistic mood sometimes. Maybe is it helpful sometimes to be, I don't know, is it healthy?
Yeah, that's a really good question. In most situations, optimism is going to be the more adaptable choice, the healthier choice. But there is something called realistic pessimism. And realistic pessimism can help keep us safe sometimes. So there is value in certain situations in recognizing that there really is danger, right? There really is reason for caution. And sometimes we should have an avoidance strategy. Like right now, a certain degree of pessimism, just a little sprinkle of it, can be helpful because, there is a virus out there that could make you sick, could potentially kill you. So you want to wear a mask if you go out. You want to limit your exposure. Don't go out if you don't need to, right? So a certain amount of realistic pessimism, of recognizing that there's true danger out there, can help keep us safe. So yes, there is value in that. Actually, an interesting thing, because I know Shahina kind of has a thing about this. Smokers in that particular domain tend to be unrealistically optimistic, right? So smokers, even if you're an optimist, if you ask smokers if they think that they're going to have the negative health benefits, are you going to get cancer? Are you going to have a respiratory disease, something associated with smoking? They'll say, no, it's not going to happen to me, right? Whereas, yeah, it probably is. I mean, the odds are that that's a dangerous thing to do, and there's a lot of health problems associated with it. So actually the optimism in that particular situation is leading to worse decisions and worse outcomes, right? So there are times when a little bit of pessimism is helpful and can lead you to avoid dangerous behaviors. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think it does. There is someone also wrote that they say that parachute was invented by pessimists while a plane was invented by optimists.
Good one.
Yeah, but honestly, it is funny, but I think that the optimist, the idea of jumping out of an airplane requires a lot of faith and optimism, and like believing that parachute's going to open and it's going to slow you down, and like, there's a lot of optimism involved in still the parachute. I don't like to fly. My friends know that. So I'm like, oh God, don't talk about planes crashing.
Oh, lots of optimism and trust, I guess, also.
Yeah, a lot of trust, a lot of hope, right? A lot of faith. And those are part of optimism.
This is a good example.
It is, and it's a funny example. I like that one.
As we have started talking about, happiness, being more happy, I recently read this, statement by this English philosopher. He lived in 19th century, but he said that you stop being happy the moment you ask yourself whether you are happy. So what is happiness then?
Oh my gosh, that is such a big question.
I know, but
how do we define happiness?
Is this guy a pessimist?
Well, yeah, so I disagree with that assertion that the moment we ask ourselves if we're happy, we stop being happy. I don't think that's true. I can personally think of many times when I've reflected on it, like, wow, I'm really happy right now. And sometimes even surprised myself. I was living in Tashkent last year, and it was a challenge for me to adjust to everything, new culture, new food, new language, everything. And there were times when I said, surprisingly, I'm really happy right now. Like, I'm really content in the moment. And asking myself that question did not make me less content. I think self-awareness is always a good thing. Just because you stop and ask if you're happy right now doesn't mean you're going to stop being happy. I disagree with that assertion. But there are a variety of ways of defining happiness, and without getting too involved, because that's a whole nother lecture that I give in my positive psychology class. We have one day where we just talk for 2 hours about what does it mean to be happy. Most often the way we measure happiness is just giving out a self-report measure, just asking people questions about their own well-being, and we ask them to tell us, how happy do you feel? So it's just a sort of self-reflection on their own happiness. But there's three main sort of aspects to happiness in research that we tend to look at. And the first one is this idea that it's sort of called Hollywood type happiness. And it's this really superficial happiness that comes from material goods. It comes from physical pleasures, eating ice cream, eating cheesecake, other kinds of physical pleasures. And they're fleeting and they're superficial. And we kind of feel like we're on a hamster wheel. We're like, you have to continually be finding that next pair of shoes, or buying that nice new thing that your neighbor has, or that car your friend has, or new clothes, whatever it is.
Smoke another pack of cigarettes.
It could be have another cigarette, have another drink, find another person to be with, whatever it is. And that's not going to last. That's not long lasting happiness. It definitely gives us a momentary boost. There's no doubt about it. And some people get stuck on that level of happiness, and they're just constantly trying to find the next source of that like positive emotional surge that you get from it. The next level is this idea of flow or engagement, finding activities in your life that you really enjoy, that when you're doing them, you get totally absorbed, totally engaged, and you sort of lose all sense of time. Everything outside of you falls away, and you're just completely wrapped up in what you're doing. It can be making music, it can be baking, artistry, drawing, painting, singing, dancing, playing chess, sewing. It can be anything, really, anything that you enjoy. The more you can construct your day in a way that creates this sense of flow, that's what we call that total engagement. We call it flow. The more moments of flow you get, the happier you will feel. You'll have more positive emotion, less stress, less negative emotions. Right? So I'm very lucky that I have a job that I love, because it allows me to find flow. I can lecture for 2 hours. I can have a question and answer discussion session with students. I don't even know it's been 2 hours. Like, I literally lose all sense of time, and I'll look at the clock and say, oh, we have 10 minutes left. we better wrap up. And I think we saw this in the session that we did last time. Gahar had to interrupt us and say, we only have a few minutes left. Like it felt like it was 10 minutes that we were talking, but it was actually an hour. Right? So the more you can construct your day in ways that give you flow, the happier you'll be. And then the final aspect of happiness is that deeper sense of purpose and meaning in your life, right? This sense of connectedness to something larger than yourself, something outside of yourself. This can come through religion. It can be spirituality. It doesn't have to be. It can be a connection to nature, connection to other people, a connection to some cause that you care about, but a sense of connectedness and a sense of meaning and purpose to your life. That's the deepest, most long-lasting, most fulfilling way of defining happiness. But now we've kind of moved a bit away from the topic of optimism and the larger idea of how do we define happy.
But we need optimism to be happy. And these are all related, so that's why we are in the circle.
No, you're definitely correct about that. We are in the circle. And this is all content that I teach in my positive psychology class. It's all related.
Oh, I wish I was part of this class. There is a question, from Gulnaz. She says, is it true that women tend to be more optimistic than men? There's gender.
Oh, that's an interesting question.
Here we go again.
Yeah.
Men and women, like, who's better?
No, I haven't seen any research to suggest that there is a gender difference in optimism. There's gender differences in other things. Like, for example, when we talk about those thinking traps, women are more likely to fall into the me trap and blame themselves, whereas men are more likely to fall into the them trap and blame other people. Women are more likely to, when they get upset, they're more likely to internalize their feelings. They're more likely to sort of keep it to themselves. They're more likely to be depressed, to cry, to be anxious. Men are more likely to externalize their feelings. They're more likely to act out in anger or hostility or aggression. But in terms of overall just optimistic thinking, I've never seen any research to support that there is a gender difference.
Good to know.
Yeah. And it's a skill you can learn. So even so, I wouldn't worry about it. Like, men can learn to be optimists, women can learn to be optimists. Gender doesn't matter in this particular realm.
There is another question from Nurbakhet. She was sending it to private box. She asks you, Laurie, how do you define yourself? As a pessimist person, as an optimist person, as a realistic pessimist, or how would you define yourself?
Yeah, that's a good question. My natural tendency is towards pessimism. I lean towards being more pessimistic, and I've had to put significant effort into teaching myself to be an optimist. And I really feel like I have. Like I have probably about 10 years now, I really recognized that I needed to be more optimistic in my thinking and started using a lot of these strategies. And I do yoga and meditation, and that helps me a lot with self-awareness and, stopping myself when I get stuck in a negative cycle. I can notice it and I can stop and do something different. So I think I am a reformed pessimist. That's how I would define myself.
Reformed?
Reformed pessimist. Yes, I believe that I have done enough work to call myself an optimist, but it was not my natural tendency. It took effort to become an optimist and to maintain that optimism. I know that if I sort of let myself, I will slide back into pessimism.
It's a constant work then.
It is. Yeah. I mean, but it's gotten a lot easier.
You have to train yourself.
You do. It's
Professor
like,
Wolfe.
I said, it's like doing push-ups. Yeah.
I'll be doing them today. Yeah. I just have to ask this question because it is important. I know that it could be discussed as a whole of other topic and for several hours, but still, many people hold on to their past, and that's why they can feel themselves happy because of some things that happened in the past.
Good question.
Actually, you can do nothing with your past. It doesn't exist anymore. You can change it. You can choose your past. This is what happened to you, and that's it. But what kind of feelings we should be using to treat our past, because it haunts you, you know, it follows you everywhere.
Yeah, so that's a good question, Shahina. You're right that we can't do anything about our past. We can't change what's happened to us, but we don't have to continue to relive it. So it lives inside of us, right? And we hold on to things, especially when we've had trauma in our past. And letting go of trauma is very difficult, and that takes a lot of effort, and not something that we can handle right now with, you know, just a few minutes left. But we can continue to try to let go of things we can't control, including our past. Allow that to sort of not control us anymore. Allow us to ourselves to sort of let go and recognize, yes, this is my past. I've had these experiences, and even in some cases, draw strength from that. You know, I've had really challenging things in my past, and I'm okay. I mean, relatively speaking, I'm here, I'm coping, I'm doing the best that I can, and see that as a sign of resilience. We try to reframe it in a more positive light. My past has made me stronger.
Again, we did a full circle.
Got me to where I am right now.
Yeah, love it. So our past can serve us as a source of resilience.
It can. And I saw somebody typed into the chat box, they asked if there's really specific things like, okay, I already did say some specific things about how to become more of an optimist, but since that person asked, like, are you going to go into specific things? I'd like to, before we finish, just recap very specific things that you can do to sort of train yourself to be more of an optimist. First, it's noticing when you're being negative, stopping and reframing it. Say something positive. Work on identifying specific things that you can control when you're faced with a challenge, and letting go of things you can't control, right? So reminding yourself, okay, I can't do anything about this aspect of it, but I can do something about this other aspect of it. So focus on what you can control, and kind of try to push yourself to let go of what you can't control. And then when you figure out what you can control, take proactive, purposeful actions to do something about that domain. So if you can identify what you can control, then actively work on that. So if I can't control the family that I'm with, but I can control my attitude towards them, right? I can control to some extent how much time we interact with each other during the day. I mean, not totally, but to some extent, right? So identify what you can control, and then take proactive steps to control that. Try to see challenging situations as opportunities, and believe in your own ability. Just continue to remind yourself, you can get through this. You are resilient. You can cope with this. You can adapt. You can be flexible. And another thing that optimists do that I haven't really mentioned is they are able to take other people's perspectives. Optimists tend to be more flexible in their thinking. So that's a skill you can practice. You can actually practice putting yourselves in someone else's shoes. So when you catch yourself being negative, you can stop and think, okay, what is this other person probably thinking in this situation? Practice taking their point of view. It's kind of a debate skill, actually. And see if you can just train yourself to do that. Does that,
and of course, being
seem a little bit more? Oh,
listing grateful.
Yes, that was the last thing I was going to say. Practicing gratitude. So that's the kind of the last thing is, again, seeing the positive side of things. And even in difficult situations like we're in now, there's always things to be grateful for.
And keep breathing.
And always keep breathing. Always keep breathing. Yes, please don't stop breathing. That's a serious problem. We can call that a problem. Yes.
So can we have a gratitude circle right now? Can we do this gratitude circle right now? So I'm going to start with myself. Guys, I want to invite all of you to share one specific thing that you are grateful for today. Don't say such general things like, I'm really thankful for waking up, or, you know, just being alive. I mean, we are all grateful for this. I mean, let's find something specific about you. Let it be simple things. For example, I'm really happy today that I remembered about this t-shirt because, you know, it was somewhere at the back, and I didn't even, I couldn't remember that I have this t-shirt. But I was so, you know, happy when I
what
found
it
out
says.
that
Can you take your hair a little bit so that for the love
We can't
of
see it.
for the love
For the
of
love
Nike.
yeah, sneakers.
Oh,
I love Nike
okay.
actually.
This is my thing, you know, all about sneakers and shoes. So I'm
Mm.
really happy for remembering about this t-shirt and being able to wear in front of somebody so that you can appreciate this. Thank you, guys.
Oh, thank you for sharing, Shahida. I am grateful for finding a courage today to make a bread, because I mean, it takes a lot of time and effort. And after this session, I'm gonna go and finish it. But I think it's still a good thing to make your own bread, and especially when you don't have to go out all the time. So I'm grateful for this, for finding this courage.
Oh, I hope your bread turns out beautifully. I'm sure it will be wonderful.
Thank you.
Yes, I am very grateful to Go Viral for arranging these
Aw.
talks, because this has given me something really fun to look forward to each week. So it's helped me pass like 3 whole weeks of the quarantine. I've been able to focus on this. So thank you so much for giving me this opportunity, because it's really been nice for me to have this to focus on. It's been fun.
Oh, thank you, Laurie. It's been a pleasure to have you.
Our special resident. You're not a guest anymore. You're
Honorary
our special
resident.
resident. Yeah.
Thank you. Who else would like to? I see Svetlana, hi, is here again, and she typed something in the chat box.
I'm grateful that I learned about some positive thinking strategies today, she writes. That's nice. Thanks for sharing. Who else want to share?
Guys, turn on your microphones and just...
Yeah, it's
show up.
below on our left side. You can unmute yourself and then just pick up. Otherwise, you can just type in. Oh, Diana writes, I'm grateful for having my homework done for today, so I can take time for myself.
Good.
That's nice. People are having homeworks. Yes.
Ramis, I'm grateful that I ordered 2 burgers today. Oh, that's nice, Ramis.
That is
Waiting
nice.
for me. Oh, that's nice. Sivara wants to say something.
Sivara, you want to say something? No?
May I ask a question? I'm Svetlana.
Oh, sure.
Yeah. Hi,
Svetlana.
How are you?
No, not Sivara. Sorry.
Hi. Yes, I missed the last week's session, and I'm sorry about it. I was so busy. But my question here. So this was really related with weight loss journeys, and people tend to eat more carbohydrates when they're depressed. So what is that, and how can this be something that can be controllable? How can someone control their eating and their behaviors when they're stressed? Because this comes naturally. You tend to eat, some people tend to eat more, and some people tend to avoid food. They stop eating. So how can this be controllable?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. We tend to go for comfort food, right? Foods that make us feel comfortable. We look for like release from our stress in food. And often those are sweets, they're carbohydrates, because they have a comfort factor to them. What you can do, I think there's 2 things you can do to try and manage that. One is manage your stress in other ways. Recognize that the reason you're going to these foods is that you're trying to reduce your stress. So instead of trying to eat your stress away, try to do one of the relaxation exercises, which you missed. But if you want to go back to the Telegram channel, I think there's maybe 6 or 8 relaxation exercises that they're all videos that I shared. So you could pick one of those. And the other thing you can do is exercise. So exercise both reduces stress and helps us control our appetite. So I would recommend doing something positive to reduce your stress, taking some time for yourself, even though, like, as moms, I know how hard it is for us to prioritize ourselves, but we need to. We're important. We're the glue that holds everything in our households together and our families together. So we need to take care of ourselves. So exercise and then do something to relax so that you don't feel like you have to eat in order to reduce your stress.
Thank you for your answer.
Or sometimes it helps drinking, except
water. Yeah.
Yeah.
I used to go
all day
just
long.
water.
I used to go swimming whenever I felt stressed or depressed. I used to go swimming. This is how I dealt with it. But being locked down,
Yeah,
you know.
no, you can't. Yeah, it's hard. I don't know if there's something else you can do in place of swimming right now. You can do Shahina's push-up challenge if you want. I've been just doing like body weight exercises in my house. I'm doing videos. There's tons of videos on YouTube or online. Dancing.
I mean, I just don't understand why people should be stressed in their own homes. I mean, there are so many. This is that I don't get. I mean, there are so many things. Your home is your home, and this is the most happiest you should feel. And there are many things that you can do in your own home, things that you wouldn't do when you're not locked down. So. I mean, that's not me. Yeah. I'm very happy. Actually, I'm very happy. I'm ready to be locked down for another 2-3 weeks.
No way.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
I'm glad for you.
Yeah, I mean, spending time with the family, cooking the new recipes, pulling out, reading. I mean, I feel the happiest. I mean, I'm not.
You sound like an optimist.
Yes, I am.
Svetlana, you have followers. I mean, people are, sharing that they support you in this.
And I see people agreeing with you that they're also very, very happy at home. I'll tell you that I am also very happy staying home. I'm very comfortable in my house, and I'm more of an introvert, which we talked about in a previous session. But at the same time, for a lot of people, their home is not such a comforting place. I know that's kind of sad to think about, but it's true. I mean, you know that from working in the prosecutor's office. Like, and even for people whose homes are happy, safe places, they can still feel really restless, being unable to go outside and just engage in their normal activities. And, it's emotionally exhausting to have to constantly adjust everything about the way we are in the world. The way we get groceries is different. The way we work is different. The way we learn is different. Like, everything's different right now. So even though our homes might be happy, safe, comforting places, I hope they are for many of us, it's still psychologically taxing to be adjusting everything in our lives. But again, it sounds like you are optimistic and you have a lot of positive strategies to deal with it. Exercising, take care of yourself, cooking, being with family, having social support. Those are all key to having a good experience while we're getting through this time.
Thank you.
Laurie, I think you absolutely have to hear this, because Camila wrote that I'm grateful for watching this live because I was really sad last few days, and your words helped me, which is nice, I think. And Sivara also wrote,
thank you.
I thank you, Laura, for showing some ways to avoid feeling bad and strange every time from people and uncomfortable situations around me today. I'm glad to cycle around streets after waking up at 1 p.m.
Yeah, a lot of our sleep schedules are not our normal patterns.
Yes.
It's just the way it is right now. I understand, but I'm glad that people are feeling better. That my goal for this particular session was to give people some real specific strategies and motivation for being optimistic and helping yourselves get out of that negative thinking, because it's easy to fall into those traps of negative thinking.
Yes, absolutely. Well, more or less of that. Timur also wrote privately to me, I'm really grateful for that today. I finally stood up and realized that life is perfect and started to avoid taking a day for granted. Nice.
That is nice.
Yes. Oh my God, I think people don't want to let this session go. We can't hang up. People don't want, although we've been already more than
more than an hour.
Yes.
And it's just here is a good reminder for you guys. I'm sure that many of you follow us on Instagram and Telegram, and you are aware of this announcement that we make. But tomorrow you will have a chance to find your flow in creative writing. And those who are interested in writing and you want to create something of your own, but you don't know how to do it, you will learn it with Anna Poloni. She is American, French, Hungarian writer, journalist based in Paris, France. So join us again for our Go Viral sessions, and let's learn something and find our flow. I love this, saying the idea of finding flow is just speaks to me.
Yeah, that one sounds, I might log in tomorrow. That sounds interesting.
Oh, absolutely.
Me too.
You should, because Anna is amazing. I've been participating in her podcast for the creative writing, and her topic tomorrow will be writing your way through the pandemic. It's going to be at 8 o'clock Almaty time and 4 o'clock Paris time, but I don't know what time will be in Tashkent and in Minnesota. You have to calculate that perhaps. Yes.
Yeah,
yes,
we can calculate later. No. We can calculate it a little later.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, and just wanted to kind of, as we summarize these 3 sessions that we had with Laurie, and it's been amazing that it gave everybody this, every week we were expecting to find out something new tips and new ways to get through these difficult times. Just to summarize, Laurie, can you give like general tips for everybody, considering that we had different positive thinking, self-care, and adjusting to the new normal? What would you say to everybody?
Yeah, so the takeaway from all 3 sessions, the way I would summarize it is be patient with yourself, understand that you are adjusting and the people around you are adjusting, and that's going to take some time and effort, and we're going to be sort of navigating through this together. So try to be patient, try to be kind, try to be understanding, take care of yourself, spend time refilling your own cup, making sure that you're doing things to de-stress, to take care of your own physical and psychological well-being, and don't lose hope. The future will be better, and tomorrow, today can also be good, right? So continue to see the good in things and be grateful for all of the opportunities that this quarantine presents to us. That's a very short summary.
Thank you. Yay! Thank you so much, Laurie.